There are around 4.5 million baby boomers in this country. They own half the nation's wealth and hold housing at a rate that no other generation even comes close to. But the oldest of this generation are now well into their 70s and 80s. So over the next few decades, inevitably, millions of these properties are going to change hands. And that's where this theory starts to kick in. You see, young Australians already can't afford to buy in. So who's actually left to buy? Surely there's not enough buyers and surely prices have to collapse, right? On the face of it, it's a clean, logical story. But when you actually start to look into the data, this narrative mostly falls apart. And what's really happening underneath it is far more interesting. And that's what we're getting into in today's video. Boomers, whilst only making up about 1/4 of the population, hold about 53% of the country's private wealth. More than 3/4 of them own their own home, and half of them own their home outright. No mortgage at all. Compare that to Gen Z and they're sitting at about 24%. Boomers didn't just buy homes. They've ridden the biggest single asset class boom this country has ever produced. Buying in decades ago and watching those homes increase in value multiple times over. So the raw materials for a crash are genuinely there. An enormous population of housing mixed in with one key aging generation. The real question is, what happens when this all starts to move? Let's have a look at the scary version first. Overseas, this fear is often referred to as the silver tsunami. Now, the logic for this runs something like this. Boomers age, they downsize or pass away, and the millions of homes they own all roughly hit the market at the same time. But the generations behind them are smaller and have historically been priced out. So you get a wall of supply hitting a shortage of buyers. And more sellers than buyers in a market only means one thing: prices fall. In the extreme version of this story, prices don't fall, they crash. And a generation's worth of housing wealth evaporates because there's no one on the other side of the trade. It's a tidy little theory, and it's rooted in basic supply and demand economics. But it fundamentally has two flaws. Firstly, supply doesn't arrive in the way people imagine, and neither does the demand. Let me explain, and we'll start with the supply. Reason number one is boomers aren't a single event. Boomers were born across nearly 2 decades, from 1946 to 1964. They age out gradually over 20 or 30 years, not in one big hit. And where this has been really closely modelled overseas, the conclusion was relatively blunt. It's not a tsunami, it's a tide. A slow, absorbable trickle, rather than this giant wall of water. Reason number two is boomers overwhelmingly don't want to move. They tend to age in place, staying in the family home as long as they can. And honestly, the system kind of pushes them to do this as well. Stamp duty makes moving expensive. You can easily set fire to tens of thousands of dollars just in transactions costs, just to downsize. And then you add in, there's often not smaller homes in the suburbs that boomers want to buy in. So they just stay put. And this genuinely creates a situation which the data actually flags. About 61% of households are just 1 or 2 people. And the average Australian house, 3 or 4 bedrooms. Simply, Australia is full of large houses with very few people living in them. It's an inefficient use of housing stock. It means that those houses are released slowly one at a time instead of dumped in waves. So a generation that's spread across 18 birth years that mostly don't want to move in a system that penalises them for moving, that's not a flood. That's a slow leak, and the market absorbs slow leaks. And here's the other half of the equation the crash theory forgets entirely: demand. Australia isn't standing still while this happens. We're a growing population. The population grew by around about 400,000 last year, And Australia forms something like 175,000 new households each year. Sellers don't need every young Australian to be able to afford a boomer house. They only need enough qualified buyers for the houses that actually hit the market each year. And into that gap flows migration, new house builds, existing owners trading up. The homes aren't being released into a vacuum. So if the supply is a trickle and the demand is still there, where do the buyers and the money actually come from? The buyers are the obvious part. Existing homeowners upgrading, migrants, first home buyers that are unassisted with irregular wages and finance. But the market for a house is never just the next generation unassisted. There's a force underneath all this that changes the whole picture. Australia's at the start of the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in its history. Over the next 2 decades, it's estimated that $3.5 trillion will flow from boomers to their kids and grandkids. Now, that money doesn't just all flow neatly into property. It gets split between siblings, clearing debt, paying for holidays, shares, tax, aged care, you name it. But a meaningful proportion of that money does flow to the generations behind them. And property is a main area that money ends up in. And you can already see this happening in real time. Around 60% of first home buyers are already getting assistance from the bank of mum and dad, or the bank of boomer. Boomer bank? And the average parental gift towards a deposit has risen to $74,000. And what used to be a loan is now more of a gift because parents simply just are not expecting that money to come back. Finally, a win for Gen Z. But here's the tighter version of that punchline. Who's buying the boomer houses? The generations behind them, increasingly with the money from the boomers themselves. In other words, some of the money buying the boomer houses will actually be boomer money. That's another reason where this crash demographic story isn't as simple as it sounds. But it's also where this story stops being reassuring and starts to get uncomfortable. The biggest housing divide of the next 20 years isn't likely to be boomers versus millennials at all. It might be millennials with wealthy parents versus millennials without them. Think about what boomer money buys boomer houses actually means. It only works if your parents owned a house. If they did, you're in line for a deposit, an inheritance, and a house. And you get in. And maybe one day you can even upgrade that home to an even nicer home, something that you could never have bought on your salary alone. If your parents didn't, you're at a massive disadvantage. And at the very least, you're going to be rolling into auctions, bidding against people that are using other people's money. Every inherited deposit makes an unassisted entry into the property market that little bit harder. And the game's not exactly easy as it stands. I'll make it concrete with a quick example. 2 buyers, same generation, same income of $120,000 a year. Buyer A has a deposit of $50,000. Buyer B has a $300,000 deposit because of the bank of mum and dad. Same income, completely different housing market. And that's the divide that the wealth transfer is quietly building. And economists are pretty blunt about it. Inheritance will only continue to amplify this gap. And you can already start to see this in the numbers with Gen X as the wealth transfer starts to get going. And even for those in line to inherit, it's not the clean windfall that it sounds like. It arrives later in life. Boomers are living longer and longer, often well into the 80s. So the money often arrives late when kids are in their 50s and not their 30s. Way too late to be a leg up for a first home buyer. More likely funds to be used for their own retirement or helping their own kids into the property ladder. And none of this is ever a guarantee or any sort of certainty around it. And this is sort of the sandwich generation reality. Gen Xers caring for elderly parents while also caring for their own kids. Waiting on wealth that will help in retirement but isn't any help at the starting line. And one more myth that's worth killing on the way through is that not every boomer's rich. Plenty rent, plenty have never owned and never will. The wealthy boomer isn't average, but the average hides a lot of people that the boom left behind. So if you're young and hoping that a mass boomer house sell-off is going to hand you the keys to a cheap house, I wouldn't be building your plans around that. The demographic crash is unlikely to happen in the way people imagine or on the timeline that you'd hope. Here are the 3 things to take away. 1, the fault line of Australian property is shifting. For years it was millennials versus boomers. The real line now is family wealth versus non-family wealth, and that line runs straight through your own generation. 2, if you're expecting to inherit, respect the shape of it. Later, divided and uncertain. Build your plan as if it was never going to come and treat it as a bonus if it does. 3, and this is where the policy actually bites. Whether housing frees up at all. Downsizing incentives, stamp duty removal, more suitable homes for older Australians. So much of this decides how much of the boomer stock flows down to the younger generations. An issue worth paying attention to at every election. So, who will buy all the boomer houses? The generations behind them. Existing owners trading up, new households, young buyers on ordinary incomes, and increasingly, buyers carrying the wealth inherited from the boomers themselves, slowly over decades in a market that absorbs it rather than breaks it. The dramatic question, the crash, in my opinion, was never the right one. The real question is quieter and a lot more uncomfortable. What happens to those whose parents never bought in? Because that's the divide that's being built right now. A video for another time. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.